Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel about all kinds of buzzwords like edge, orchestration, automation, and challenges in all those areas. A bit more networking, 5G, and operator focused. What we would like to do, this is a panel, but we are missing one person, and we would love to kind of replace the person with the whole audience here, and would like to invite you to participate in this conversation with us, because we would love to make this as a conversation while Beth is not sharing her password with others on the screen.
Well, what's weird is it's not showing up. Yeah, that's weird. It's not showing up.
So that is the plan. I hope that us being the last session before lunch is not getting in the way of people's participation here. So while we are setting up, does anyone have any question or concern to throw into the hat of discussion topics for today?
Oh, good. It showed up. Excellent. Now I just have to bring up my questions. Yeah.
You can also have your own mic.
Well, I'll put on this one.
There you go. So Beth has a few slides just to kind of kick off the conversation, and then we will go into hopefully a lively discussion. And with that, we are counting on all of you.
Yeah. Because it's all about, for me, the fact that we still don't have the tools. Here, let me turn on the mic. Okay. We're live. Okay. Just have to get the slides up, and this is all about, for me, because I come from the telecom world, we still don't have the tools to run networks at scale from the open source community. We're still building them, and that's pretty sad, because telecom community, Verizon's been running managed network services for 35 years, and we have a lot of tools, but we built them all ourselves, which sucks. Okay. Give me 1 second to pull up the Edge panel. Here we go. One Summit Edge panel. Is that the right one? Yeah. You get to. Oh, good. You don't get to see it. You don't get to see my messiness. There we go. Come on. I want to bring up the final one. There we go. Final Edge panel. Open. Excellent. And, enable editing. Yeah. And, oops. Yay! We are in business. And let's see if this works. Yes!
Some tools do work.
Yes, some tools do work. Thank you, Microsoft. Okay, so what we are talking about here is applying telco has had for many years day 0, 1, 2 methodology. How many people in the room are familiar with this? Okay, excellent. So I don't have to spend the next 10 minutes explaining the methodology. It doesn't have to be a tutorial. But we are applying this to product development and service delivery in the software-defined world, right? It's traditionally in the telco service, it's a service delivery model. So you will notice it's just the two of us. So Gergely is supposedly on it watching, so we can embarrass him. And so just to level set, really quick. So day 0 really focuses on the bootstrapping and the development process. That's the stuff that the open source community is good at, right? Developing the tools, developing the code, the development services, the templates, right? 5G blueprints, right? That's all great, but you know what? Telecoms don't make money on day 0. We make money on day 2. And day 2, we need day 1 to get to day 2, right? Day 1 is where, a customer puts in an order and says, hey, I want some network services out at my site or out at my 5,000 sites. We want to avoid mistakes, avoid having to go back and redo things because the configuration got screwed up. We want to make sure that the deployment is validated before it goes live. Verizon actually did this. We automated the validation process of turning up circuits. 88% of or close to 90% of our circuits now just runs through a script. Says, hey, we're going to start billing you because everything passed. Again, we don't make any money on day 1. We do hopefully get some customer satisfaction out of day 1 because they like if we turn it up in 2 days. And then day 2, that's where we make our money. And so what day 2 is the monitoring, the metrics, SLAs, automating SLAs. If you're a customer of Verizon and you've had an outage, isn't it great? You don't have to tell Verizon. By the way, we do know when you get outages. Wouldn't it be great if you just get, hey, we know you had an outage this month. Here's a credit on your bill. You know what? Saves us money to do that. So let's start with development piece, right? Agile, because obviously we need to do things faster these days, right? But we're not writing just application software, we're writing services. So Ildikó, by the way, you can. Oh, yeah, I will. You'll do. So yeah, applications in the middle, as I like to tell all the sales teams that I work with at Verizon, our customers are buying network services just to run their applications. They don't really care about the network. They're always going, oh, yeah, but the wireless and the wireline, they all work differently. Like the customer doesn't care. Absolutely doesn't care. Customer just says, hey, does my application work as I expect it out on my site? So, but, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into making sure that happens, including security, transport, wireline and wireless. Everybody who's in the telecom industry is the dirty secret is wireline and wireless are completely architected differently. Orchestration, automation, bingo. That's where we really need to put some real effort in. And that's upfront effort. Network services and integrating all of them. I think somebody yesterday was talking about blueprints. Yeah, we have blueprints, probably about 500 of them. That's probably way too many. Because every time you tweak something about the service, oh, that's another blueprint. So keeping track of which ones are still good. Oh yeah, we have a new software upgrade. Got to update all the blueprints. So that's a problem. So this is just a quick picture of the management components. There's a lot. So this was actually just taken from a slide that was actually done internally to Verizon to say, hey, this is all the components that we have to think about. So
I may have questions, like who can relate to what Beth has been saying so far? Is that what you're seeing as well, or you're seeing something completely different? You have different challenges.
I see Van has got her hand up.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing exactly what Beth.
Oh, wait. I'll give you the mic so others can hear you too.
No, I was just going to say I'm seeing exactly what Beth is describing. These challenges are real, I think, for pretty much every network in the world.
So where can open source help? Because unfortunately, probably every single one of these boxes is 3 projects that may or may not be talking to each other?
Probably not talking to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm from the open source side. I'm in the Open Infra Foundation. We are working on, our communities are working on infrastructure software, building blocks and components. What can we do to make this all better? What can we deliver to the telecom industry to make this move forward? And on the other hand, how we can get the telecom industry involved in all this more, so that we know what needs to get done, we can get it done together, as opposed to everyone pointing fingers at somebody else, that this is why it is not working, because you did not deliver your job. At the same time, the other person is like, you never told me that what I had to do. How do we connect those dots? Does anyone have an opinion about where the disconnect is, or where the missing motivation should come from?
Yeah. And by the way, we're just talking about the day 0. We haven't even gone to day 1. So let's move on to day 1. Okay. So you've gotten your first order in. You've built all this stuff, gotten your first order in. Hey, how are we going to get it out to the customer? Customer said, I actually just got an email about this. Customer ordered 6, count them, 6 firewalls to be stood up. And they said, oh, we want them in 2 days. Oh, and it turns out one of the data centers that got assigned to ran out of IP addresses. That's a problem. Right? So, the sales team came to me and was like, what are we going to do? Blah, 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 blah. Got fixed because I connected them to the right people who said, oh, yeah, I can fix that. I can just pull the IP address that's missing out of this pool, blah, blah, blah. That's nice and easy. Could have been automated, right? The automation, we did assign IP addresses automatically. Sadly, the tools that were built in for day 0 did not handle when you run out of address space. They don't go tell you, hey, maybe you need some more address space in this particular data center. That's a problem. That was an expensive problem that could have been fixed if somebody had thought about it. So, the deployment, I think that there's a serious lack of tools in this space here. The cloud service providers have lots of tools, but they're based in a data center. It's easy to automate a data center. You send it over to the rack. You send it over to the fabric. We're working on a WAN here. Working on a WAN with 5,000 or 1 million nodes. So where do you think that the open source community can contribute to really solve this problem? Because this is a problem across vendors, across the cloud providers, across the
Operators.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I have a basic question. So, on the open source community is pretty new to the concept of service providers. Service provider have been for much longer. So I feel the first step should come from the service providers collaborating themselves and defining what they want, instead of every other service provider coming and telling we want it this way to we want it this way. And obviously every implementation is different according to your networks. But what is that common ground you want needs to be perfectly defined before an open source community can go and actually develop it.
That's a great question. So first, at the high level, the needs are the same. We need to deploy, users have sites, they have transport, access, hardware, and network services. That's the core that every site, and this applies to a home too, if you think about it. A home router has the same thing. That needs to be delivered, and it needs to be delivered as automatically as possible.
I guess everyone understands the use cases. The use case, everyone understands what is the use case of a service provider network. But because you have a lot of legacy,
That's the problem.
and there is no way to completely deploy a greenfield network again,
Never.
so it is drastically different for each service provider how they have implemented their networks. Right? So how can an open source community work with so diverse requirements of each of different service providers?
That's a good question. And I opened it to others. I see some providers looking at you, David.
Well, so I have an entirely different view because of my involvement in ORAN, which tries to address these things. And we at AT&T at least are looking for their...
And Verizon's in ORAN
yes,
too,
and,
as well.
and we have, exactly, and very active as just
Yeah.
like we are. And in the working group 6 area, there's a lot of activity on there about the interplay between the cloud network fabric and the WAN fabric, because it actually sits as an underlay to the end cloud that we want. And so it's can't really be separated either, and it complicates the issue. And we're also brownfield at the same time we're going to be deploying
Right.
our vRAN. So it's very complicated, and it's not fully baked, to be honest about
Yeah.
it. Lack of tooling, same issue, right?
tooling.
But if we look to the ORAN concepts, okay, it would indicate that there should be orchestration and tools that are defined, and therefore then it would be incumbent on potentially open source to look at such things as if we take a step up, the O2 interface tells what the cloud is responsible for, and how the SMO would ask the cloud to do things.
Right.
But what's not clear is what's in the FOCOM, which is the cloud management aspect of it, that federated cloud out, as you say, we have the same problem out to many nodes, tens of thousands potential of locations with millions of devices at the end of all those locations. And so if we look at how does that get federated out, we look to the O2 to do the cloud aspect of it, but then the SMO needs its corresponding integration between network function orchestration, service orchestration, and what happens for cloud configuration.
Yeah, are you aware of the MEF work in this area?
No.
Let me talk to you afterward.
Okay.
Because I'm working on, I've been involved a little bit. Mehmet Toy has been more involved in that, where it's defining that interface via APIs. So it's pretty deep down. So, yes.
I'm thinking about your problem statement, which is pretty interesting. And what I'm thinking is, isn't SDN the ultimate solution to your problem, to create this abstraction overlaid network where everything's orchestrated ultimately?
Yes,
on
that is-
top of all this legacy stuff where you have all these problems.
Absolutely, that's
Isn't
what-
that the way that you solve this problem?
It is. ONAP is one of the answers. So there is definitely that aspect of it. We're also finding, I think, and apologies to the vendors in the audience, we're getting pushback from the vendors. So Verizon built a system that we actually used 2 orchestrators, and which was, the idea was to support the VMs and ultimately the CNFs when the vendors showed up with the CNFs, so they haven't yet. And it uses heat templates and stuff. It's based on OpenStack. Mm-hmm. What we found, and we launched the product about 4 or 5 years ago, we've sold a bunch of it. What we found is the vendors pushed back. And since then,
How come?
because we're taking control away. We're not in the router bit. We don't build routers. We don't build firewalls. We don't build network services. There's plenty of vendors out there that do that. But they saw it that because we were providing a white box that could support those VMs, that was taking control away from them. So they push back. So they are, they want to keep that appliance because that means control. Because whoever owns that box has control, or that's how they see it. I don't see it that way. I don't think the telecoms see it that way in general because, we're in the services business. I can tell you our customers don't want the box, they're like, we'll give them the option, you can buy the box yourself, and they're like, nah, we'll let you take care of the box, we don't care. But I think many of the traditional routing companies are very hardware focused, and I think that's been a big problem, and I think that's been a drag on getting to that orchestration. And they've also all done their own orchestrators. So where we had built one that we thought, one to rule them all, we're now supporting 6. Which and a lot of them are going into the cloud. So we have, a lot of our customers, enterprise customers, are private networks. So we have to explain to them, well, you have to open the private network because the controllers are sitting in the cloud, and all the licensing stuff all happens over the public internet. Our customers don't want to necessarily hear that, that message, because they don't want to open their private networks. They want to have, keep it. The way we did the controllers is we put them in our private network and then connect to theirs. So it's all private, but that's not what most of the vendors are doing. They're sticking them in the cloud. So I don't know, others thinking about that? So anyhow, this is
One in the back.
yeah.
Hi. How about end-to-end testing and more around what it looks like when you input here and output after all of the magic and chaos happens?
We built the lab to do that because we do end-to-end testing because the integration, both in the day 0 and day 1, we have to test that all.
Right. Not only lab, but also live network.
Yeah. Our
And
lab has a live network in it.
Yep. Chaos testing and maybe
Yep.
some capacity planning, projection testing
We do
as well.
performance testing to the point where we kill it.
So where's the problem? Where are the problems not falling out of there, or are they a little bit?
So first of all, it's really difficult to do full end-to-end integration testing and performance testing. When we first, and again, this is personal experience, when we launched the product, we did, integration testing and stuff, but we made a mistake. We relied on the vendors' numbers on their performance, which turns out to be wrong. Because I
Right.
think that they were, they did it in their own labs, but they
Individual-
didn't necessarily have a live network in which
Yeah.
that they were doing the testing against.
Yeah.
We do our testing in a live network.
Yeah. Two very important things, right? They test against one component for max number. So when you put all the components together, it's not
You don't
the
get the
same.
max numbers.
And then absolutely the type of traffic, the volume of traffic, all of that also makes a big,
Oh,
big
yeah,
difference.
we had a customer. This happened directly to a customer. We stood up the system for them. The customer was very happy, and then they turned on. It turns out this particular customer was running voice traffic through a firewall. Not a recommended thing to do, but apparently this customer is really paranoid. Yep. The firewall fell over. And then they come to us, what happened to this firewall, blah, blah, blah. We're like, well, we took it into the lab. They gave us a set of sample traffic. We're like, oh, well, you're running voice traffic. Of course it's going to fall over.
It wasn't set up for that. But
Right.
yeah, a lot more sophistication. I think you have a really good point that the level of complexity has just increased. I don't even know by how much with all this decentralization.
Orders of magnitude.
And so then the testing has to get a lot more sophisticated, a lot more granular. There has to be more specific models, right, that can be run, especially through the live network. Maybe
Yep.
that would help a bit.
Yeah. Well, the lab we set up actually is, it's the tier 3 engineering lab. So it's got the live network in it, and it also is, so if, like the example of that I was telling you about the customer who was running voice traffic over their firewall, that went to the same lab that's doing the development testing. So there's a feedback loop there, which I think is a really good thing, because we can, we try to avoid, obviously, having live customers have problems like this, but when we do run into them, we can address them directly back into the development effort. So in that case, we figured out what was the proper configuration, and we rolled that back in. And now, when we sell these products, we give the sales team has a set of questions, and one of them is, are you planning to run voice traffic over your firewall? Oh, that's fine. We'll just set it up so that it works. So there was a question?
So realistically, how long does day one take? Or how it has progressed over the years?
Oh.
Are you day one in one day, or you take a week to do day one?
It depends. In our hosted service, it's less than a day. Usually the longest part is the setting up the customer configuration piece of it. The standing up of the VM is a couple hours at the most. But the customer piece takes a day or two. So yeah, we've stood these things up in 2 days. Out on the at the edge, where it goes into a customer site, the biggest holdup is usually the lack of hardware, because the hardware's been back ordered. So that we've had serious problems with that, which is obviously not Verizon's fault. But when the hardware gets plugged in, it's again, it's a day or two at most. I mean, it's a couple hours to stand up the VMs, and then somebody has to go in and set up the configuration. So, because it's automated. So the day one, there is most of it's automated, but there's the final piece where we put in the customer specific rule sets or whatever, which that's done by hand, obviously. We could automate it, but that probably, maybe we should automate it actually. Because if we could have, get the customer to fill in some forms and then turn that into a set of rules, we could automate the whole thing, right? We do have some services where we have like 2 or 3 pieces of information we need from the customers, and then the rest of it's completely automated. So we actually have the customer just fill in a form with the 3 pieces of information we need, and then the rest, and those services get stood up in 15 minutes. So I think it's possible.
Yeah, but the equipment you're getting from your supplier, right? Is it pre-provisioned with some OSs and all that, or completely bare?
It's not completely bare metal. It has what I call a shim. It's got a hypervisor and some orchestration tools for a phone home kind of thing. We do not pre-put on the images for regulations reasons. Because if we're shipping to a country that we cannot stand up that particular VM, we don't want to mess around with that. That's particularly true for not so much the routing, but for the firewalls, the security stuff. So there's certain countries we can't sell a specific vendor. Yeah, import. Yeah, import export regulations. They're really tough. I'm sure you have.
Either way, right?
Yeah.
They might have regulations against you bringing it in. We might have. U.S. might have regulations from you sending it out.
Yeah, right. Both. Right. So that's why we are very careful to not ship a box with that it's pre-configured. So. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I haven't been involved so much in LF Edge. So, yeah.
Using that, we can provision bare-metal devices with your choice of full stack, OS plus.
Yeah.
Management services.
That's good.
On that note, we are technically at the end of our session because it was only a 30-minute session. I happen to have questions to ask the audience to noodle on and maybe talk about it. Like, for instance, we talked about, open source communities trying to agree on, like, service providers agreeing on something. And from where I sit, which is, again, an open source foundation, and in the open source communities, I see a lot of conversation that are happening behind closed doors, the GSMA conversations. ORAN has a software community which is sort of open source-ish, but the rest is behind closed doors. Is the information getting out of those organizations, or is it shared?
Open source is truly open, but you're right. Part of it, even some of our PTLs are not ORAN members, because you don't have to be an ORAN member to be in the ORAN source community. But that means you don't have access to anything except for what's publicly announced by ORAN.
Which to me seems like it's a blocker, and I
Yeah.
wonder, like,
And MEF has the same hindrance.
Yes,
You have to
the
be a
exact same.
member.
There's other things in the domain that are also a problem in that space, because we have copyright issues in OSC because 3GPP. If we want to say, here's the DU spec, but that's controlled by 3GPP, they have copyright. We can't put it into open source because then we're republishing their material, and we have a copyright issue, and we're trying
Yeah.
to solve that in OSC.
yeah, so my question to the service provider community is, how can we overcome that? Are all the conversations that could happen in public happening in public? And if not, how can we solve that? The other thing is the testing angle, because there are testing and conformance and certification efforts in almost every open source community. We do what we
Yeah.
can, honestly, but at the same time, here comes the vendor, puts the secret sauce on it, and it's not compliant from that point on. So what can we do there? I don't know, but I would love to hear what people think, because you are experiencing the downfall of all that.